Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. If you recall, in the last session, we had consistently been discussing the cognitive theory. And during that process, we had tried to understand how memory is evoked, how people try and understand what the stimulus comes into the position, how it goes to the short-term memory, then how does it transfer to the long-term memory, and how we retain information, and then over a period of time, how can we recall information. That was where we had focused our thought. Along with that, we had also suggested and looked at a model which is known as the ANSOFF growth model. And the idea was to suggest that there is a direct link between these learning theories and how does those links can be developed for strategic purposes. And in this case, we discussed the growth matrix, which if you look at the screen, we would be able to recapitulate that very quickly, where we were talking about market development and penetration strategy as well as product development. And we said this can be linked up with mass or distributed learning frameworks, where mass was concentrated to develop behavior which would result in speedy purchases, and that is how we penetrate the market. But on the other side, when we were looking at development of product or development of the market, we assumed that it will be more better if we can distribute this learning process over a period of time, which would mean advertising would be developed and presented in such a way that it would try and evoke learning over a period of time. Now, having done all that, this session, what we would try and see is the major theory which is known as involvement theory. Again, before we go into involvement theory as a whole, we will try and look at one other concept from where we already started the whole strategic thought process in consumer behavior, and that was segmentation. If you recall, STP is the crucial strategic framework that is available for marketers. So the first fact that we want to take care of is how to segment the market. Now we have to see, when we segment the market, how does the involvement theory or the consumer learning theory processes can be integrated with that. When we were segmenting the market, we needed to understand that segmentation is when you break up a market or consumers based on a number of frameworks. One is behavioral frameworks, where you tend to see how they buy, what they process, whatever it is, what they like and what they dislike. But if we look at the involvement theory, where we are talking about consumer learning, then we are trying to suggest that segments can be developed on the basis of how they get involved in the purchase process. The reason is very simple, because if we understand the kind of segment that is there and how people get involved in the learning process in terms of whether seeking information, whether they are going towards looking for data, whether they do not care about information and just go and buy products. So we have to link it up, and we have to see what segment requires what kind of behavior, because as we will see as we progress through the lecture, we will try and see and we will find out that there is an issue whereby people or marketers tend to focus more on the products which are called impulsive products and ignore the area where shopping goods are involved. The logic is very simple, and as we go along with it, we will be able to understand and identify what those issues are. But just to recapitulate again the segmentation theory, we have to understand that there are a number of frames by which we tend to develop segments. Now, among them, we had talked about the social status, we had talked about classes, we had talked about the population, the age groups, and so on and so forth. But now we would like to also try and figure out whether segments can be developed or evolved for the purposes of advertising and marketing communication, which would be related to the consumer learning thinking processes. We have already discussed quite a bit, and we need to now come to a point where we need to be sure as to how these are integrated. Now, if you recall, and you also must see a point which is very important is that all these consumer learning processes or theories have progressed. Now, one has moved into the other has gone into the higher levels, and we are now reaching the end point. Just to link it up, if we start again, we see the conditional learning, which was purely reactive. But then we added cognitive associated thinking process, where the person was thinking and associating between two stimulus and response systems. From there, we moved into a very simple area of getting into the instrumental learning, where we said that it's not just the thinking or connection between the two. We also make trial and errors. And we keep trying and error between stimulus and response, and we keep watching till we become satisfied. However, that was also not sufficient to explain consumer learning and consumer behavior. So a new thought came into position, and that said, okay, we do learn because of trial and error, but it's not necessary that I should be doing the trial and error. I can also watch another person, and where we came into how we said behavioral framework, where we learn how to behave because other people are doing it. So we are actually following the behaviors of people, and we said this is very important because children normally learn that way. And like I told you, that we will be discussing a little bit on the ethical issues of the consumer learning process, and we will bring this point back again, where we will discuss how particularly the behavioral facts have a lot of ethical implications in the marketing. Going back again, since we talked about instrumental learning, from there we moved into and we said, okay, yes, we try and we experiment, and then we come to a conclusion that this is the best fit that we have and this is more relevant to my systems. But this did not stop our consumer learning processes or consumer learning behavior concepts. We went a little further, and we said there is to be something else more than just experimenting, just listening and learning from other people. So we came to the cognitive theory. Now, cognitive theory was where we said it's not alone these two things, response, stimulus, but people actually think, and people actually find information, they review information, they analyze this information, which becomes the core of marketing concept, where we talked about at the very beginning that a lot of stimulus comes into place. There is a black box, and we are now concerned with the black box. How does this whole thing go on? So we came to the conclusion that there is a possibility that people definitely seek information. So a little bit of clinical research has been done, which is related to how minds work and how thought process take place, how information is received, where is it stored, how do you target it, and how do you, how do you cue it so that a response comes out of it, in the sense that people tend to learn not from only looking at some information, because information is constantly coming in. Over a period of time, there must be a frame where it can be stored. And then you need to trigger off this information. This triggering off process by which people tend to recall things becomes very, very critical in our learning processes, in our learning theory, and also for marketers. For example, we know that we have been sending ads. We should know where is it located and how can we trigger off this information so the response come into position. We had a lot of discussion on that. Now the question is that, is it enough? Do people really just learn and go into the brain, it stays there, and that is how we work about it, and then whenever we want to trigger off, the marketer gives a cue or sends a stimulus and response takes place? So the logic says, no, there is something more to it. Why? Because now we are talking about a different aspect of marketing. And if you recall, you will recall that there were certain concepts given in marketing which were related to, for example, buying situations. Now, there is something known as impulse buying situations. So marketers started thinking about how do you trigger off, or how do you play with this impulse buying situation? Now, impulse buying situation is a totally different buying than when you are going into long-term thought process. Impulse is you walk into a store, you are going to go out from the checkout counter, you see some chewing gums there, somebody just picks up 5 and pays for it and walks off. Now, this is totally different from a buying process when you want to buy a television. So when we were talking about this issue of how various other concepts are integrated, we will be taking a look at that once we have cleared the logic of the involvement theory. And then obviously I told you in the last session that once we have completed the theory, involvement theory, which means we will finish the learning processes, we will try and look at the ethical issues, followed by, if we still have time, we might look at a bit of attitude so that we can launch that lecture and the concept of attitudes, which we'll then take up in the next coming sessions. Now, going back to the involvement theory. Involvement theory, like I said, has a lot of relative relevance with the product situation, the kind of buying behavior, the kind of process of problem solving, extensive or intensive problem solving, or short or long-term problem solving. So all these thoughts came into position. The idea was, and it came about from the clinical studies which suggested that the brain has 2 hemispheres. And for this purpose, I'm showing you a picture which shows that the brain is broken into the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. And according to clinical research, it suggests that the left hemisphere or the left brain is the one which relates itself to information. It tries to analyze things. It is working in a lot of informative frameworks. However, the right brain is more intuitive, more instinctive. It does not go into a specific targeted information evaluation, but it looks at pictures which are broad, and it tries to come to conclusion without in-depth analysis. Now, this split brain theory is very significant in terms of the way we think about how involvement can take place. In a very simple concept, let's say there is an ad, and this ad is on the television and it does not give much information, it just shows a good model. The question is, which part of the brain would be triggered off by this behavior? And it suggests that the right side of the brain would actually take part of the behavioral systems. Why? Because it is more holistic. It does not get interested in trying to find the exact information. However, if a person is more used to the left side of the brain, now if a person is consistently more attuned to the left side operations, that means his activity, brain activity or thought activity is more significantly related to the information processing and so on and so forth, what will happen? If you gave him this kind of an ad, it will not be received in the proper manner. It might have misperceptions. It might create wrong interpretations. But if we find that there is a group of segment of people who have a very strong involvement issue, they get involved in information, we need to know exactly what kind of media would be relevant to them, what kind of message should be there, what kind of content should be there, what kind of length would be involved, because it requires the left brain processing. Now, there are a number of measures. We will talk about it as we come along, because to create segmentation, you just can't do it without really carrying out a survey in the market and trying to find what is the size of component size of the target market that you are interested in, who most probably are involved, very strongly involved in seeking information, information analysis, and so on and so forth. The idea that I'm coming again to suggest is that this involvement, which is high involvement in the purchase behavior, or the long involvement, the low level involvement in the purchase behavior. And like I said earlier, they are linked together. The purchase situation, for example, might be linked together. The shopping good or the convenience good might be involved in this. For example, in convenience good, if you try and assume that people are very strongly involved in the purchase behavior while they are buying convenience good, you will be wasting a lot of money, which will be unnecessary because people are not interested in long-term involvement, or they are not involved in involvement. So what they will try and do is that the information which is very peripheral might be sufficient for them in this area. Now, we have already suggested that the right brain is where non-verbal, timeless, pictorial and holistic information flows, and the processing is totally emotional, impulsive. It has been suggested, and this is with due apologies to the ladies, that ladies use their right side of the brain more often. And that is why if we look at the advertising that is targeted towards the women, is more of this nature. So the point that is being suggested is, and we have now to link up the logic of the right side of the brain thinking processes with learning behaviors or consumer learning process, it is suggested that right side is more attuned to classical conditioning framework. Now, here is where I have been repeatedly saying that we need to remember that there is some kind of integration that takes place, and when we are developing advertising, we need to understand how does it operate. Now, again, like I said, right side is more intuitive, more emotional, does not involve itself in detailed analysis of data, so you don't have to give that. But according to research, it is suggested that the classical conditioning is more relevant to the brain, right side brain activity. And it also therefore relates to the visual component of advertising. For example, the model, the background, the overall picture, and not the detail of the product attribute. That is not suggested. It also suggests that if TV advertising is being used for this purpose and it has to trigger off the long-term memory, then you need to be able to decide which particular cue has to be sent as stimulus so that a response can be drawn. And obviously that cue has to be which can be recalled, and it is also familiar because we talked about stimulus generalization, and therefore the logic of stimulus generalization works with the right side brain learning processes. And it's again important and suggested that this has a tendency that we go into repurchase behavior based on the right side brain activity, because repurchase behavior does not allow us to get involved in repeated analysis of information. And what we tend to do is that we just go for repeat purchase. Why? Because we have seen a cue, we have seen a visual impact, and that triggers off the purchase behavior. And this is where we are relevant in terms of how the left or the right side works. But let's look at left side of the brain. If we want to involve the left side, logic says that we have to give detailed information so that people would tend to study, analyze the media or the information, and then come to a conclusion. Obviously, if a marketer is trying to compete in a market where products are already established and people are into this repeat purchase behavior, and he wants to break this logic, so he has to force the target market to get involved in the purchase behavior. And the only way he can get people involved in the purchase behavior is by showing distinctive or comparative advertising, in the sense that he has to challenge the brain to get involved in a process of trying to see between the two products, trying to assess which one is the right one for them. And the only way he can do is that he has to bring into position certain frameworks. For example, if we try and understand that this product or this product could be forced into becoming very personally relevant to individuals, or if we can increase the perceived risk in purchase behavior regarding a particular product which used to be bought as impulse or which used to be bought in a repeated purchase framework, then yes, we can force involvement, and that would then trigger off the issue. And you will see this a number of times happening in the ads for shampoo. For example, people have been regularly using shampoos. They are not aware of the risk. So if a marketer comes into position and he launches a product which tries to suggest that if you continuously use a wrong brand or wrong product, shampoo, you could lose your hair. Now, this creates very high level of risk. And if this marketer is suggesting that commonly if you keep using without reading the ingredients, you could land up in a problem of baldness where you will lose your hair, this will force the person to move into the high involvement area where the person will start reading the detailed information on ingredients and so on and so forth. And most probably at that stage, if the marketer now offers his own product as an alternative which will take care of this risk, we will find that the person has been able to break through a market which is constantly in repeat purchase behavior. And if the same thing has happened regularly when you've seen the soaps, or if you have seen the ads for cloth cleaning liquids, where people have suggested that repeatedly using powder, cleaning powder, could destroy your hands, so people, particularly the women, get even they're triggered off, even if they were using their preferred brand or what they used to regularly use. When this information is given that maybe by using your regular brand you are damaging your skin, it forces the person to start looking for information so that the person can get a product which is gentle on the hand. And at that stage, marketers have tried to introduce a product which suggests that this product or washing liquid or cleaning liquid is more gentle on the hands. If you now try and understand how these can be linked up, we become more clearer as to why learning processes is very critical in understanding these frameworks. It is suggested that the high involvement products are normally where the importance of purchase is very high, the perceived risk is very high, and the individual's relevance to himself is also very high. We will be coming to this when we go into the area where we will talk about the marketing or strategic relevance to the products and the learning theory. Now, again, to finish it off and close it down, this idea about involvement theory and consumer relevance, I've already discussed impulse buying. Now, impulse buying is a category of buying situation which is on the spot. You've not thought about it, so you buy. Now, for that, you require a particular stimulus or cue which will trigger that off. And if, as a marketer, I understand that my product falls in impulse buying area, then I do not need to give lengthy ads about the attributes and so on and so forth. I need to focus on some kind of a display in the shopping area where those things can be triggered off. So if you walk into large departmental stores, you will see very logically and very rationally placed purchase frameworks or some kind of an advertising or some kind of a purchase model which will trigger off your desire to go and buy the particular product that we're talking about, which is basically impulse. On the other side, if I understood that my product is categorized as a shopping good, then logically it suggests that I must provide information, comparative information. And please remember that when we are talking about consumer behavior, we are not only talking about the household consumer. Why? Because there is another category of consumer which is very, very significant, and that is business-to-business purchasing or business-to-business buying behavior, where businesses are consumers to business products. Now, in that kind of category, normally impulse buying you will not find. You will not find impulse buying where business-to-business marketing is concerned. There normally we will find that there is an extensive problem thinking or problem solving issue. The products that are purchased have long-term implications for the companies. So naturally, there is going to be always very high level of involvement. However, there will be some products, for example, paper clips. Now, paper clips are bought by businesses, but they are kind of not very intensive research or problem-solving techniques are used. What we do is we just go into repeat purchase. However, when we are involved in lengthy or large-scale products or products which have high degree of relevance or are very important, then we need the consumer, the business consumer, to be given details of that information about the attributes, the product specification, and even to facilitate this analytical frame that we are talking about, we suggest that comparative information is provided. If you really go into business-to-business marketing, you will find that companies tend to develop brochures which try and place their product in comparison to the competitor's product. And the idea is that in one go, attributes can be seen across the picture. If you go, for example, look at Sony, or you go and buy Toshiba or any other kind of product that is available in the market, particularly of this nature, you will see that their brochures normally put down all the competitive products, and then on the other side they list down all the attributes which are normally used for analysis or for taking a decision, analyzing. And what they tend to do is that they put tick marks or circles to suggest that, yes, this product has these various attributes, the other may not have some of them, the third might also have the same ones, and that the idea is to facilitate the consumer in his buying process. So what we are talking about now is that in the area of how consumers analyze, what we tend to define in this consumer learning processes, we call it a central route to persuasion, which means the marketers tend to use a lot of data to persuade the consumer to buy the product, or the peripheral route, which means low involvement and only pictorials or the kind of TV ad that we want to see without really giving details. So we should remember that in one case, when you are trying to persuade the consumer using a lot of detail, you are going through the central route to persuasion. And when we use very minimal information, but it's more or less content and imagery, then we are using the peripheral. The peripheral actually means something on the outside, not at the core. But when we go to the center, then we are talking about how do we hit the targeted area with a lot of information flow. So there is a persuasion in the central route, and we can also persuade people via the peripheral route, but it always depends on the nature of customer, the target segment that we have, the kind of people involved, the kind of involvement that we talk about. And we have already suggested that there is a problem in actually trying to measure this. That is the basic issue. How do you measure involvement? Because there is a problem of how to define involvement in the product and involvement in the purchasing process or involvement in the consumer learning behavior. What is really suggested is that there is a number of frames. You may go via the cognitive frame, you might go via the behavioral frame, and you might also look at involvement in terms of the product category or the product type. The problem of measuring, because like I said, whenever we are looking at it, whenever we are trying to understand these problems and these logics, we have to use it for marketing purposes. And we cannot use this information for marketing purposes unless we can identify certain areas or segments where we can apply these. Now, again, therefore, like I said, there is a problem here. How do you measure involvement, really speaking? And what kind of frame do you use for involvement? There is a group of researchers who talk about, like I said, cognitive thought process or cognitive processes, which really mean the person is very conscious of risk. Person is very conscious of his ego. And that is why he tries to get involved in high level of involvement and tries to go through all the information and data. And I already told you that using this high-risk framework, we can switch a person from low involvement to high involvement. And that is what the logic was. But on the other side, there is a behavioral frame also which tries to understand involvement of people. That behavioral frame suggests how do we seek information? Where do we find information from? How much time we use in locating all this information? Obviously, if we understand that there is high involvement, but it is totally behavioral framed, then we need to be able to suggest where they can locate the information, where should they be able to compare this information, and marketers do that. They try to facilitate the consumers in all forms and ways. Finally, we also have another suggested measure area, which is targeted onto the kind of products we have. Obviously, when you want to buy something which is very costly, which is very significant, and only one-time purchase, the search and the involvement would obviously become high, but you need to be able to determine that, and you need to be able to then provide the kind of information which is required for these local areas. We again have been talking about information area or the problems of measure, but we should become clear by now that given all these problems, we still try and find how much involvement a person has in his purchase behavior. And here I will try and show you one of the questionnaires which actually tries to measure a kind of involvement in products. And please remember that when we are discussing research in the area of consumer learning or consumer behavior, it becomes very product specific. You cannot ask the question in a very generalized form. The reason is that a person may be high involved while he's trying to buy, let's say, a laptop, which may cost about 50,000 rupees, and may not be highly involved with a purchase, for example, like a television, maybe because of certain reasons. It's not necessary that every product of within the same price level or same category would require a very high level of involvement. And that is why it is very difficult to explain or to measure this involvement process. Now, as I will show you, that there is a kind of plan, and if you look at the example, this one is by using the product in terms of, to me the product is, and then you have a Likert scale where, or this is called a semantic scale, where you have 1, 2, 3, 4, the importance or unimportant criteria. And the first one is important against unimportant, which is semantically different, and interesting and boring, relevant or irrelevant, and exciting or unexciting, and there is a list of it. So it's just not this short one. There is a list of it. But if you see, what they are trying to do is that by suggesting important, interesting, relevant, exciting, they are actually moving towards areas where we find a lot of involvement. On the other side, when it's boring, not exciting, not interesting, then we are suggesting that a person is not going to be highly involved in this area. Now, since we are talking about repeatedly of the left brain activity and the right brain activity, and we are trying and suggest whether a person is highly involved or less involved or low involvement in the purchase behavior, we have been able to suggest, and that is what has been suggested, that instead of trying to find one or the other, you try and create a profile of the whole person in terms of all areas are looked at, and you try and find a profile of the market to suggest what kind of behaviors they have related to a particular product. And it could have both sides of the picture, where you could look at his uninvolvement or his involvement in particular purchase behaviors. Coming to this final applicative stage of involvement, it becomes very logical to suggest that when you are targeting into high involvement products, then I've already suggested you need to be able to not only do comparative advertising and give more attribute analysis, so and so forth, but the basic issue is you need to be able to also check whether the consumer is comprehending what you are giving him, or what kind of information are you giving him. Because every product, particularly if you look at a computer, there is so much information that is available that can be given to a consumer, but the question is, which one would be comprehended by the person, which would be interpreted by the person in the manner that you want him to interpret. If you start giving him information which he cannot even comprehend and which only experts can understand, then I think that whole information is going to be a waste of time, effort, money. So in terms of applying involvement theory, where we need to understand what kind of information is to be given or what level of involvement is in there, we need to also know how would the person be able to understand or comprehend this information that we are providing him. Now, up till now, what we were discussing is how to measure involvement. But as a total picture that we have till now been developing and we have been discussing, we have mainly focused on advertising as the outcome of the consumer learning process, and that is where our focus is. Now, obviously, if that is our focus, then we need to be able to understand how to measure overall consumer learning. Given all the theories, whatever we have talked about, conditional, cognitive, involvement, instrumental, whatever, but now we have to understand that was what was we suggested is in the mind of the consumer. So leaving that aside, we have now been able to bring advertising into the picture. We have now, whether we have decided it wrongly or rightly, we have gone ahead and we have carried out advertisement. Now we need to be able to understand whether these advertising, that whatever the advertising is this sufficiently helping people? And we had already suggested at the point of time that unless and until a person can understand, comprehend, recall, and bring forth the information, then whatever we are doing is basically failing in doing its right job. So we need to be able to see and research or try and measure whether consumer learning has taken place. और एक जो definition किसी चीज़ की भी है learning के हवाले से वो ये है कि क्या somebody can remember something. If the person can remember, we know that some learning has taken place. So in consumer learning research or measuring consumer learning, we need to be able to target three significant areas to be able to determine whether some information has been learned or not. Number one is recall. Now, recall is like something which is whether I can remember something from somewhere, and it has nothing to do with being aided or helped by somebody. So without giving any help, a person can recall something. The second is that we show something and we tell the person, can you recognize what you're seeing? Now, this is the second kind of measure that we use, and that is recognition. Third is comprehension, which I've just mentioned in terms of involvement, but now we are trying to say from the overall learning point of view that has the person been able to understand what the seller was trying to say to him in terms of the advertising. Now, the recall frame is called unaided. It is totally unaided. What you do is normally you ask the consumer, have you seen an ad or have you watched television, and can you recall an ad that was shown during a particular period of time? Now, if he says yes, and then you can ask him, can you say what the ad said, what was in that ad, what was part of that ad? This would suggest that the person has the capacity to be able to recall that information without further help. Now, in the same form, there is something called recognition. Now, in terms of recognition, you have to give help, some kind of help to understand whether the consumer has been able to learn the content or remember something about the ad that you gave. For example, in this case, what we normally tend to ask is, have you read the news week of the last week? If he says yes, we say, can you recall the kind of ads that were there, and can you remember the content that was involved, or which was the ad that you liked the best, and so on and so forth. Now, these are two aspects of a particular measure which is talking about consumer learning. And when we do this, it helps us to try and understand more and more about whether the ads have been successful in trying to do what they're supposed to be doing, and obviously that is bringing some kind of learning or knowledge. The third aspect is comprehension. Now, again, we do that. We tend to do that in two forms. We can do that in pre-testing, which basically means we show the ad to the consumer and we ask him, can he interpret what is being shown? Now, it is up to the consumer to be able to say that this is what he understands from this ad. Now, if there is a contradiction between what the marketer is intending to do and what the consumer is comprehending, then we can at least make some changes, carry out some amendments before the ad is already put in the market and a lot of money is wasted in this area. So what we are now trying to use the measures of learning process in terms of trying to see the effectiveness of advertising before or after the advertising has been launched. Since we are talking about consumer learning measures, or we are talking about measuring consumer learning from involvement, we came to overall recall and recognition systems and even understanding, we might as well also discuss the measure of learning in terms of brand loyalty. If you recall, brand loyalty or brand equity is something which is desired by any marketer. He is interested in creating value in his brand to the extent that the person will not go to any other product or any other brand, particularly because brand loyalty or brand loyal customers provide the maximum revenues to a marketer. Now, but we need to measure that also. And how can we do it? There are a number of measures that have been involved, and they are normally related to attitudes. Since I talked to you at the beginning, in the last session also, that we will now be moving towards attitude. So most probably it is a good area to introduce why attitudes are important. You see, loyalty cannot be measured by watching somebody buy a product. If you go to the market and you see somebody buying, let's say, Sony or Toshiba or Philips, does not mean that that person is a loyal buyer of that brand. It could be for so many reasons. He's most probably buying it for a number of other reasons. So we need to be able to project consumer loyalty, and we normally tend to do that by using attitudinal measures. For example, commitment is one frame. How committed is the consumer toward a particular brand shows his brand loyalty. So that can be measured. There are instruments that we can do that. Second is, for example, if I was to ask a person that in the next purchase, what brand do you think you will be buying, is what we call propensity to buy, which means the person has a thought process and he is trying to suggest that he will be purchasing this product whenever the next time he goes to purchase. The other aspect is you can see or ask the person, how many times did you buy a particular brand in the last week or a last fortnight? Because you need to be able to suggest a time frame where he can remember. And if he repeatedly says that he bought the same product 5 times out of 10, well, you see that there is some kind of a relationship coming in relation to loyalty to the product or brand. Same is the case with cognitive thinking processes. You can ask the person, how relevant is the brand to you? How important is the brand to you? And this relates to the involvement theory, which we said that if a person is more involved with the product, tendency would be that if he is repeatedly involved with a particular area and this particular brand is related to him in terms of his risk reduction or his ego, then logic says that he will be more brand loyal to that particular product. So we, having discussed not only the various frames of learning, but we also have talked about how strategically these learning processes can be used in planning your advertising, planning your launch, and so on and so forth. But we also have been able to see that we can measure these. Various frames are available. Having talked about all of this, let's go to the involvement or the ethical issues that are involved in consumer learning process. Remember, it is very critical that we should be able to link various kinds of behavioral frames that we have discussed or learning frames that we have talked about, and then see what could be the end result, which may not be desired by the marketer, but may end in this kind of a behavior and this kind of a problem, which may be not suitable behavior as far as we are concerned. And I'll give you some examples. This is more relevant from the point of view of children. We have told you, I mean, the discussion has been going on, behavioral framework where children tend to copy certain behaviors without a lot of thought involved in it.
मैंने भी करना, आप भी करो, कोई पेंसिल, ये पढ़ा, ये मेरे लिए, पेंसिल,
Even at higher levels, we have already seen that there is conditioning theory also moves in when we try to see how wrong behaviors, which are not required behaviors, may be generated out of stimulus generalization. There was an ad where they showed that a biscuit was put into a toaster, and as you put the toaster on, after some time, some beautiful things came out of the toaster. The idea of that ad was trying to suggest to the children that if you eat that kind of a biscuit, the feeling would be of happiness. Now, this I've already suggested to you relates to the area where we said whether a person can understand the ad in terms of what is being suggested by the marketer. So what happened was that there was an occurrence where it was found that a child was actually putting the biscuit into the toaster, and when the toaster did not do anything, obviously there was nothing going to happen anyway, so he picked up a spoon or a fork to try and get the biscuit out of the toaster, and he was very badly injured. Now, this created a lot of concern among the advertisers and parents and so on and so forth. And now what has happened in America particularly, that there is a children advertising review unit. They have established that body to try and review all the ads that are presented to see how could they be interpreted by the children, what behavioral issues can come about, and whatever can happen from that angle. Now, there was another example where it was shown that there is this cotton candy, there is a machine where you can produce cotton candy on your own. So, but that was not the intention of the people, the advertisers. They were trying to say that you can enjoy eating cotton candy. The idea was not that you can operate the machine yourself. But since they showed that ad in that framework, it was found that children of a very young age, 2 to 3 years or 4 years, were actually trying to operate that machine without having the parents guide them to do that. Now, this is where the unit, which is known as CARU, the Children Advertising Review Unit, moved in, and they informed the marketers, who then had to change the content of the ad in a different form to portray what they wanted to. And we find also, for example, a big issue nowadays is regarding models. We see very thin girls as models, and according to a lot of research, by repeatedly seeing this, like I told you about the generalized stimulus, that when you see a person who is given a lot of honor as a model and a lot of praise is given to the person, so girls have started going into what we call bulimia, is a problem area of eating disorder, where children get afraid of eating because they don't want to grow fat, or they feel that if they eat, they will grow fat. On the other side, there are certain advertisements which are again causing a lot of concern, which try and encourage people to add. By looking at those ads, people tend to eat more, and when they eat more, where it is suggested that instead of 1, have 2, or instead of 2, you can have 3, so on and so forth. This has created a problem of obesity, which means people are growing fatter and fatter, and that is bringing a lot of problems from the medical point of view and actually causing loss to the economies of the world in terms of, because when you grow over fat, you tend to work less, you are more inactive, you suffer more diseases, so it becomes a problem, a medical problem, which basically comes out of the issue of responses and all kinds of work that we are doing. So the point that we are trying to make across here is that in all advertising, all these frameworks of conditional learning, observational learning particularly, all these are significant in developing, sometimes developing behaviors which may not be desired behaviors. We have seen a number of issues, and particularly this CARO unit has tried to force the marketers to remember at least 2 things, and that is, 1, the ad should not persuade the children to force their parents to buy a product. I mean, imagine that they have gone to that much and they therefore look at all the content to make sure that the ad does not force the children to pressurize their parents to buy a particular product. And the second aspect of this discussion is that they should not produce an ad which will try and tell a child that if he owned this product, he will be considered to be more important, he would be considered to be better than his peers. So what we have been doing now is we have been considering all the issues that can come about, but we need to understand how these issues can be triggered off from the learning areas, consumer learning behaviors or consumer learning theories. Now, just in the final stages of the lecture, let me also give you this another aspect. Abhi tak we were talking about children, but we also look at the older people and the maturer people that we consider. One problem that has been found in the society is what we call conspicuous consumption, which means people tend to buy things that they don't need to buy, but they buy it just to show off that they have got this product. And this is also triggered off by these concepts of stimulus generalization and so forth, where you try and emulate people who have money and you try and do things which you're not supposed to be doing. Having discussed all this, we'd like to now recapitulate whatever we have discussed. And remember, in the next session, we will start the lectures on attitude development and attitude modification. Today, we have tried to complete the consumer learning process, which includes basically what we call involvement theory. We have talked about how to measure involvement as well as consumer learning, and then brand learning, how brands or loyalty can be measured. Finally, we talked about a little bit on ethics, but please make sure that you understand that ethical issues in advertising are becoming very, very critical, particularly in the area where they affect the children because they do not think so much. So they will be triggered off by things that they see and they watch and they believe that that will be good for them also, which may not be true. Like I told you about obesity issues, about bulimia, which is a sickness of being thin, and people have tended to vomit every time they eat because of this pressure. So we need to be very careful in all doing this thing. Okay, so next time we will be taking up attitude. For now, thank you very much. Allah Hafiz.